Welcome, everybody, to episode 39 of The Hopeful Majority. Today's question: how do we fix the internet? A big question. And so we've got on Frank McCourt today. He's a civic entrepreneur, a philanthropist, previous owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers. If you're into baseball, he currently is the executive chairman of McCourt Global. He's also the executive chairman of Project Liberty, and he's got a new book out called Our Biggest Fight: Reclaiming Liberty, Humanity, and Dignity in the Digital Age. And it's co-authored by a Wall Street journalist by the name of Michael Casey. Now, look, I think we got the perfect person to talk about how we fix the internet, because I know one of the questions that has come up in the Hopeful Majority is how does polarization interact with the way that the internet has grown in the age of social media. But before we get into the monologue that we have for all the amazing new people joining every Monday, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your content, we're trying to build a platform, a movement called the Hopeful Majority, which is about elevating voices to have complex, nuanced, productive conversations across lines of difference. And yes, if you're watching this but not listening to it, and you're on YouTube, you see I've got a haircut. New haircut. We're about to break into episode 40, so you know what we have to do. So I'll see you on the monologue. Let's cue the intro. How do we fix the internet? And importantly, one of the questions that keeps coming up, as I talked about briefly in the introduction, and we get asked this a lot, is, well, look, we're talking about polarization. We're talking about division in our politics. We're talking about how nuanced the conversations are not getting, how the fact is that our conversations are being run by this vocal minority of folks, and that we aren't having productive dialogues to solve our most pressing problems, that there are growing mental health challenges. There's a crisis of loneliness that the Surgeon General talked about last year as the national epidemic. There's challenges on all fronts as it relates to how we as people thrive. And of course, one of the undercurrents, maybe the biggest undercurrent, is the role that technology has played in that, the role that the internet has played in that. And interestingly enough, if you remember last episode or the episode before that, episode 37, we had on John Gable, who was actually an entrepreneur in the 90s during the internet boom. And we had on John to talk about All Sides, which is a platform to navigate media and to determine media bias. And we had asked that question on that conversation, which is, John, do you think the internet is net good for society? And it was a really interesting conversation, but we only left it there. And I thought on, well, let's actually bring on somebody that has lived a life of success. He's done a lot of great stuff and now is focused through Project Liberty and their new book, Our Biggest Fight, which is going to drop on March 12th, to actually talk about how he's thinking about fixing the internet. Because I don't think you can have the conversation of reducing polarization, of building algorithms that reward nuance as opposed to outrage, of creating a world in which we feel like we as people are having conversations, productive engagement, the connection that the internet was intended to create, the connection that social media was intended to create, is actually realizing real success, right? It's hard to have that conversation without talking about the effects, the ramifications. And in fact, if you're listening to this right now and you're like, I don't think there's much wrong with the internet, actually. I think actually that social media is a positive. Well, this is just the conversation for you, because in fact, we also play devil's advocate in this conversation. Frank has a really interesting perspective because, he's somebody that has had a lot of business success, a lot of philanthropic success. He's done a lot of civic organizational work through his time owning a sports team, the Los Angeles Dodgers. He brings a perspective where he could focus on so many different problems. And in fact, this is a question I asked him on the conversation. Is, Frank, out of all the big fights that you could pick or claim that these are our biggest fights, why this one? Why the fight about the internet? Because the book, Our Biggest Fight, actually starts out with a proclamation. It says, the internet is broken. It's a big claim. And importantly, I think a lot of folks would agree that there is some truth to that claim. But if you're like, I actually disagree with that premise, I think that you'll find the conversation insightful. The last thing I'll say, I think the most interesting piece of this conversation for me, is that he talks about solutions that, yes, seem very ambitious. He talks about things like data ownership. He talks about the fact that we should be owning our data when big tech companies are utilizing building algorithms based on how we're manufacturing and creating information for them on their platforms. He talks about a decentralized protocol, a new protocol on the internet that firms should adopt. But then the big question it raises is, well, how do we actually get widespread adoption? Will big tech come along? What about the mental health crises that social media has created? How do we turn back the clock on those things? In other words, this conversation in a nutshell is, I think, the most bridging conversation in a sense. It's trying to figure out how we minimize the downside effects of the internet while maximizing the upside. And it talks about solutions in a well-rounded, productive way. So with that, I'm excited to welcome Frank McCourt to the podcast. Let's get into the conversation with Frank. I hope you enjoy, and I'll see you at the end of this conversation. Frank McCourt, welcome to the Hopeful Majority, sir.
It's really nice to be with you. How are you doing today?
I'm all right. I actually, just for the audience's context, you and I had a great conversation just leading into this. I'm so grateful for your time, and importantly, I had to share that we both have Boston roots. In that I went to high school in Lexington, and you went to high school in Concord.
That's right, and that's where the prior revolution started. So maybe we can start a new one here.
So that is where the Pride Revolution started. And actually, I when I was reading your book, and you got a new book out called the Our Biggest Fight. When I was reading into it, before we even jump into any of the substance, you mentioned the word revolution, so you beat me to it. You talk about Thomas Paine in that book, and you talk about our common sense. And I had to hold back my the political nerd in me and ask you, why did you, of all the different founding figures, the historical figures that you can make references to, why Thomas Paine and our common sense? And maybe I think that might be just a good opportunity to get into your broader work. But why Thomas Paine? Why draw that inspiration?
Because I think he did a marvelous job of taking what was at the time, in 1775, a complicated set of issues, and he was able to reduce it to simple language, simple terms, and actually a simple choice for his fellow settlers. Those living in what preceded the United States, and he put forward a choice for his, for those colonists living in the colonies at the time, and said, look, you can continue to be subjects of a monarchy. You can make that choice, or we can invent another concept called citizenship, and you can choose to be a citizen, meaning you're born with the same rights of that king or queen, and you have these what came to be known as unalienable rights, as captured in the Declaration of Independence, which followed. And if you choose to be a citizen, you choose a set of rights that you're born with, and that that you have because you're a person that should be treated, in the eyes of a government that will create self-governance, as equal in the eyes of that government, and it will be a government for the people and by the people and of the people, and so on and so forth. And so, I mean, we all know the story from that point on, but I think the ability to take something, remember, 800 years of monarchy is a long time, right? People got to get conditioned to that, and that's all they know. And so the idea of saying, time out, we don't have to be subjects to some, king or queen. We can be citizens, and we can do this differently. And I thought that was incredibly simple, yet, very, very powerful. And I feel we're at a similar point right now where we're all conditioned to believe that the technology that we use every day is, can only work the way it works. And so I guess we're all just, data that gets, scraped from us and aggregated by these big platforms, and they're going to decide what to do with the data, whether we like it or not. And so we're kind of becoming subjects again, quite frankly. And what if we just put the same choice in reverse, to people, and say, do you really want to give up your citizenship and all your rights, these rights that were hard fought, and become subjects again, just to be able to use the internet? That doesn't seem like a great deal to me. Like, why not have an internet that actually celebrates and strengthens and supports our human rights, our right to choose, and our right to give permission, and our right to agency, and a right to ownership and control of our lives and our data. And it just seems to me that's a much more healthy outlook.
So it's only fitting that it's two people from Boston talking about another revolution. And I guess I should ask you before we dive right into the actual core of your thesis, which is that it seems like the internet's broken. I want to ask you, why do you think in particular the rights, the independence, our freedoms you feel are under assault in the current sort of conception of the internet? What do you think about the internet is so broken?
Well, let's take a half a step back and think about the internet and how it evolved, right? So it evolved.
Please.
I mean, if you go back to the beginning, even before we called it the internet, it was really a government project to create a decentralized form of communication, so that coming out of the, or in the Cold War era, we would not be susceptible to an attack by the Soviet Union on our communication centers. And so AT&T was the big monopoly at the time. Our communications all went through very centralized hubs, and the concern was if those hubs were destroyed, we would not be able to communicate. So the government smartly said, let's develop a decentralized form of communication, more of a spider web type of communication. So if there was a hole in the spider web, you'd still be able to communicate around that
Oh,
hole.
that's interesting. I didn't know that it was a result of trying to decentralize communication. That's fascinating. So keep going. Keep going.
Yeah, and
It's
so
really
it was,
interesting.
universities and very smart uh, technologists and academics and so forth got involved in the project at 4 different universities to come up with a solution for this. And lo and behold, they did. And long story short, there was two protocols that we kind of know them as one because they've been co-joined, but the transfer control protocol and the internet protocol, TCP/IP, became the operative protocol for what became known as the internet. Okay, that in 1989, when that was the agreed upon protocol, and computing devices signed on to it, they were connected to this network of computers, right? So TCP/IP connected devices, and
Okay.
just one footnote: we're still a device in 2024. We have an IP address. We're not a person on the internet. We're a
Hmm.
device on the
We
internet.
being we being us humans on the actual internet. Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's we're devices on the internet, not humans on the internet today. And I think that's what we need to fix. So then in 1989, Tim Berners-Lee comes forward with this brilliant idea. Why don't we connect the data, regardless of which device it's on? Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP, is put forward. That's the protocol we're using for this interview, and that we all use routinely. That was the start 35 years ago of the World Wide Web.
Hmm.
And March 12th, as a matter of fact, the day my book is coming out. And that was a fantastic moment, right? This idea of this being able to connect everybody and their data that has access to the internet, and what a wonderful kind of utopian idea. But it was never designed to do what it's doing now, and we'll talk about that in a moment.
Hmm.
And the decentralized internet, this great equalizer, this great tide that lifts all boats, et cetera, was quickly co-opted by big apps that were developed, that understood these platforms understood that if they could aggregate the data and control it, then they would end up having the power and the wealth that the internet enabled. So this idea of distributing power, distributing wealth, distributing knowledge became, when the app age began, a very different thing, right? Because it became a centralized, autocratic, surveillance-based technology, which is what we're living with right now. And so these big platforms, and whether it was what was Facebook, that's now Meta, or Google, or Amazon, all were basically doing the same thing, which was scraping our social graphs, aggregating them, mapping humanity, and then optimizing for their own kind of corporate purposes, not optimizing for the health of young kids or the strength of democracy or civil discourse. And so that's the mess we're living with right now, because the internet was not designed with basic things that you need for an internet with integrity, starting with identity, for instance. This should be built with people at the forefront. Not that the inventors of the internet didn't know people were using the devices, but it was a machine-centric internet, right? That we're living with right now. Why not introduce another protocol that actually connects us all as human beings to the internet and puts us in the driver's seat? We own and control our data. The new apps are clicking on our terms of use, not vice versa, and so on and so forth. So for the first time, we would have an internet that actually was of, by, and for people. And we would have to be a person for the privilege of using the internet. And we'd have to be a real person, not a bot, or I couldn't pretend I'm you later today, and vice versa. It's like the real world works, right?
No, I would say that you pretending to be me would be a real downgrade for you, and so I don't think there's any interest in that. And what I would say, I want to actually take even a bigger step back, Frank, because I think when folks actually hear the introduction of this episode, they'll hear all of the illustrious things that you've done and sort of the wide career that you've had. And I want to get to some of the specifics of the protocol that you're proposing, um, what it means to actually own our data. You said a lot there, but even before that, you titled the book Our Biggest Fight. And you're somebody that could focus on a lot of different issues. A lot of us can focus on a lot of different issues. There's a lot of things to focus on. And we all have limited times. And one of the things that I'm always curious about is when guests come on, why did you pick this specific issue? Why is it that you think that the way in which our internet is structured actually dictates the future of our lives? Why this issue? And then we'll get into some of the specifics, because I think there's a lot there, but I would love for folks to actually hear that, why this is your biggest fight, why you think this should be our biggest fight of all the fights that folks think we got to fight.
Yeah. So just, one point of interest. I didn't title the book My Biggest Fight. I titled it Our Biggest Fight, because, no one person or company or family is going to win this fight. This has to be all of us recognizing that the technology as designed is broken. Social media is doing massive harms, and yet it doesn't have to be this way. We can fix this. So let's keep that in mind as I answer the question. I grew up in a family of builders. 5 generations. My great grandfather back in the 1800s started a road building business in Boston when Henry Ford was building cars. And for 130 plus years, we've been building projects around the world, and in many of them, infrastructure, complicated infrastructure projects, right? So we're builders, we're problem solvers. We understand, or we try very hard to understand how things work and then build those things. So that's number one. Number two, I grew up in Watertown, Massachusetts. Big Irish Catholic family, one of 7 kids, a very, very loud and fantastic dinner table every night, with lots of opinions and lots of discussion and many different perspectives. And like most kids, my siblings and I were pretty good at identifying problems in the world and talking about them. But no dinner would end with us stuck on the problem, and without my mom saying, look, you kids have done a nice job defining the problem. Now, what are you going to do about it? So that's number two. That's how I'm wired, right? And that I was just had the privilege of having, you know, behavior modeled by my parents, and being born into a family that actually focuses on building things and solving infrastructure problems. So now let's roll the clock forward to 2009, 2010, 2011, when I got divorced and I was in LA. I had, you know, another privilege of owning the Dodgers, fantastic sports franchise, and unfortunately got divorced. And, you know, really a very traumatic moment in my life, a very difficult time. And uh, what I, you know, aside from the difficulties that it causes a family, you know, being torn apart, it was at a time when uh, the iPhone had been introduced, and Facebook was about five years old, and I became a target of social media. You know, people I didn't know, the people that had their own agendas, you know, that were, it just was, you know, in a, put it this way, I know what it feels like to be helpless on the receiving end of people just attacking, and um, and it's just not a nice feeling. And again, I'm not looking for sympathy, and I'm certainly not a victim and so forth. But I learned something. I learned that this emerging technology was incredibly powerful, and you know, I ended up landing on my feet, did very well, you know, when I sold the Dodgers. But it was it was hard. It was a hard few years, and it was and I felt what it feels like to have your reputation maligned, and you be just bullied and kicked around, and all these things said about you that it's impossible to rebut them all. It you just, as I said, you feel very helpless. So just keep that in mind. And then after that, I was able to take some of the proceeds from selling the Dodgers and start a public policy school at Georgetown University, and thought, rather naively in retrospect, that maybe we could introduce some policies that would act as guardrails as this new technology developed, so that we wouldn't be just tearing people apart and tearing people down. We'd actually be strengthening our civil discourse, and strengthening our communications channels, and our ability, and strengthening our democracies, and of course protecting young kids. And we even put a massive data institute inside the school, knowing that big data was going to be very, very important. And, you know, we learned very, very quickly that the data that policymakers need is not, you know, it's not publicly available. It's sitting in the server farms of a few big platforms. And you know, one story, Manu, comes to mind. I was speaking to a faculty member at Georgetown who was doing a project for our federal government to actually, her thesis was that you could predict in advance large scale human migration by words that were amplified on social media. And the government was very interested in that, because needless to say, if you have millions of, you know, people migrating, to know that in advance would be hugely helpful. And she knew the data was available to sharpen her thesis and her model, and Twitter had it, and she asked Twitter, you know, if she could have access to that data, and they said, for $100,000 you can. And so $100,000 was half of her budget. She couldn't give Twitter that money, and because she'd have no money left for, you know, to do the rest of the work. So it struck me as so ironic. Here we have the most vulnerable people in the world who have produced the data. Here we have an academic who's not making a lot of money, looking to do something that could make people's lives better, and she can't do the work because a private enterprise has scraped that data and says it's theirs. And it just seems so upside down to me. This is data that we all create ourselves, and it should be available to solve problems at scale,
Mm.
not to make somebody money. And by the way, I'm a capitalist, and I mentioned my family's been in business for 5 generations, so I'm all for people making money, ourselves included, but not if it undermines democracy and
Hmm.
destroys everything we love and harms kids. So enough is enough, and that's and so all of this led me to a point of saying, how do we fix this? And then when I sat with our tech people and we came up with a solution, it was an infrastructure, an engineering solution. It was now a problem
Yeah.
that I couldn't unsee and a solution that I couldn't unsee. So that's why I'm doing this. It's because it's for whatever reason, you know, here I am with the perspective I bring forward. And yeah, when you see something, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. And especially when you have your temperament of being a builder. And I should say, as a young person, Frank, it's a tremendous privilege to be able to sit here and get to understand why entrepreneurs like yourself, why leaders like yourself actually get started. And the reason for the show being called The Hopeful Majority is because I think most people in the country actually are interested in seeing builders succeed. I think that people don't want destroyers. I think people want builders. People don't want exploiters. And so when you share your background of your family upbringing, of having this building temperament, of having a traumatic event happen, of selling the Dodgers, which I should say as a San Francisco resident right now, must have made you a Giants fan all of a sudden. And then you are the victim of the internet, and then over time you see how the internet and the way that it's evolving is being extremely exploitative. The natural sort of thought that I have is, whether you think the people that are actually building and leading these companies, and we've had some of them on the show, do you think they're motivated to actually exploit, or do you think that they're victims of a system that causes them to essentially use the data in an exploitative manner because that is key for the bottom line? How do you think about that? Because a lot of people that I work with, a lot of the audience oftentimes wonder whether the leaders of the institutions themselves are corrupt and bad, or if you think that it's a system that they're trapped within. How do you assess that dynamic?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, I'm still a Dodgers fan and a Red Sox fan. So
I was hoping you just let that slide. Just don't even address it.
yeah, I look. My point of view on this is, um, I'd rather look forward than backward and leave it to
Mhm.
other people to kind of do a diagnostic as to like who's to blame. I will say the following, however, that whether this was whether the design of the technology that we have now, the way it works, and or the incentives that we have now, uh, i.e., again, the way it works, is deliberate or as a result of it just kind of evolved this way. To me, it's a difference without a distinction for the
Okay.
following reason: we now know it's doing great harm. So it, how we got here, who know what when? Again, I'll leave that to others. What we know now
Mhm.
is that this centralized autocratic surveillance technology is doing great harm. Social media platforms, as designed, are doing great harm. Um, Stealing people's data and exploiting it is immoral. We now know that we're the internet is broken. We're destroying everything we love. For what?
Mm.
You know, a few powerful companies. It's it's knowing what we know now. These companies need to change, and we need a new architecture and a new set of principles and a new set of values that actually bring humanity forward and put this human beings first, and not dehumanize
Mm.
us. Or we just need to build a whole new model and they can become obsolete.
Mm.
And Buckminster Fuller said it well when he, paraphrasing, when the model is so broken, don't waste your time trying to fix it. Build a new model and make the old one obsolete. And That's where we are if the existing platforms are not going to change, because otherwise they're going to destroy us. And again, we need to build and create and evolve an internet that puts people at the center, and where we're in charge, not one where a few huge platforms are in charge. If I asked you to, for 3 words or phrases to describe democracy, I don't think you would say centralized, autocratic, surveillance based.
Hmm.
We're not going to have a democracy with autocratic, surveillance based technology.
So if we,
China can have a great autocracy.
yeah, and it sounds like I think a lot of people would agree. I'm sure some would also disagree with that diagnosis, but avoiding some of the specifics, what I want to get into is how you. Let's get into the actual solution. So you talk about decentralizing, you talk about ownership of data. Could you get a little bit specific in terms of what that architecture would look like? And importantly, you're obviously on the cutting edge of leading this, and so what do you think would be different about sort of this third generation internet? What do you think people could expect from it that they don't currently see from today's centralized surveillance technology, as you would put it?
Yeah, happy to comment on that. And I would like to put a pin in your comment about people agreeing or disagreeing what I just put forward as a perspective, and I would love to hear what the opposing perspective is. Like, what disagree with what and why? I would love to hear your take on that, if you wanted to be devil's advocate, because that's how we learn and
Well,
evolve.
do you want to should we go down that path really quickly?
Yeah, either way, I can either answer your question or we can go down the path, whatever you
I
prefer.
think I think I think the folks will appreciate the devil's advocate for a quick second. We love doing devil's advocate on the show because I think that it allows people that might be sitting there saying, I don't know if I like that. I think it'll give you a chance to potentially persuade those folks. And so here's what I hear. What I hear is that and by the way, personally, and I'm very honest about where I stand personally, I actually agree with most of your perspective. I'm one of the Gen Zers that people think is not actually a Gen Zer, So I have every interest in I think in even in some ways rewinding the clock because I think it's been incredibly destructive. But I hear folks saying that the internet is actually has been a net good for society because of its capacity to have connected people across the world, because of its capacity to have given people the chance to see each other, to learn from each other, to gain access to tremendous knowledge. Um, how would you respond to that claim that it is net good? And because it's a net good, that the current path that we're on is the path that we ought to continue on.
Yeah, I just I think it's an interesting perspective, but like, why are we dealing with net good as a barometer?
Mm.
Why are we, if we know we can look, if let's say we're building a city and we put a plumbing system in to distribute water, and um, most of the time the water's clean and healthy and we need it to survive, right? We need water to live, but sometimes it's toxic and it's making the people sick that are drinking the water. Would we be sitting around saying, yeah, but the plumbing system is net good because sometimes it delivers good water and people need it to live? And why aren't we saying, let's make the damage it's doing, let's eliminate the damage it's doing, and then
Mhm.
it's all good, not net good.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
I just don't understand even I just think it's like a false way of thinking about it, because we want to, our job is to maximize goodness and minimize badness. It's not
Yeah.
to like say, well, here we are and it does some good things and some bad things, and I think it's a few more good things than bad things, so let's carry on. I find that to be less than compelling. And of course the internet does some good things. Of course connecting everybody on the, connecting people all around the globe that have access to internet could be a good thing. I and there have been some very, very good things, but it's at a huge cost, is my point. And
Mm.
for me, the destroying democracy and undermining or making it far more difficult to sustain democracies, not just ours in the US, but around the world. And really making civil discourse
Mhm.
very, very challenging. And by the way,
Yeah.
your whole project is one that wouldn't, I don't think you'd be doing it if civil discourse was awesome and
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Um, an information ecosystem which is completely contaminated. You know,
Mm.
we have to struggle to determine now what's fact and what's fiction, because, and particularly now with deep fakes and so on and so forth, you can
Mhm.
get very compelling quote evidence of something that is totally wrong, but you think it's right, right? Because we've dis and misinformation is now just infiltrated our information ecosystem, and now we have real hard evidence that social media is killing kids. And those that it's not killing, it's making many of them very anxious, depressed, and having thoughts of suicide and so on and so on. So why would we allow, you know, a mental health crisis, an information crisis, a civil discourse crisis, and a democracy crisis because the internet and
Mm.
technology is doing a few good things? I
Mm.
just, I don't understand it. Let's, it can, it, we're not, I'm pro tech, massively pro tech. We build these systems. We love technology. Let's design it in a way that it does a better job of strengthening democracy,
Mm.
improving civil discourse, cleaning up the information ecosystem so we can rely on what we see and hear and read on the internet, and protect young kids and give them their adolescence back. And so,
Mm.
and this is all doable. And but put all that aside. In the digital age, our data is our DNA. It's who we are in the digital age, because we are all connected to devices, to the
Yeah.
internet. We are all connected to devices that are connected to the internet. So the data we create is our property,
Mm.
and it is our personhood. So I think we need to move this discussion away from data and into one of personhood, because
Mm.
this is who we are as lived beings. And why would we give all that up to a few platforms for the right to use the internet? It's
Do you
nuts.
and how and now that I can see somebody asking, I agree with you, Frank. That makes sense. Actually, I believe that the internet is exploitative, that it's driven the level of our civil discourse to new heights. So how connect for me the link between your solution and solving those problems. How would you say that the digital data ownership, this shift to a new protocol that you would call the DSNP, how do you see that resolving a lot of the negative consequences and the unintended consequences of the current model of the internet?
Yeah. Let's stipulate up front, there'll still be bad actors and people doing naughty things and
Of
this and that,
course.
but let's not
Yeah.
make it easy for them. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's not give them a weapon to, where, put, put poison in our clean water. And then how do you get the poison out? Right. So
Yeah.
let's see if we can design something that really mitigates and thinks that through. So here's how it would work. So imagine, just as we've all adopted TCP/IP and HTTP to get to where we are now. Let's imagine we all adopt another protocol, DSNP, and this is a and the internet then becomes a socially aware internet. It's one where, rather than our data being scraped and aggregated by a few platforms, our data is is a universal social graph, not billions of atomized graphs. It's a universal graph, or a global graph, which is universally accessible. So that data is available to anyone who builds on top of it, but with permission. It's not
Mm.
it's not just scraped and aggregated and exploited. It's actually the network effect now, which is the power of the internet, is built into the internet, right? And so the remember we're now moving into an age where we don't need these big, huge um, centralized storage platforms. We have something now called shared state, where the data can be stored in a decentralized way. So it can be aggregated, and it can be used for good, and it can be used to make money, and so on and so forth. But the people storing the data will no longer be able to control, apply algorithms to it
Mm.
to optimize for whatever they decide to. Imagine an
Mm,
internet where you now are in charge as an individual to get on the internet. You have a handle or an ID, so now you're actually logging onto the internet, not logging onto Facebook, and you have one uh, handle or log on, and you're on the internet, and every app that's also signed onto this protocol is playing by the same rules, so you can move from app to app without 50 different passwords, and your graph is portable, and the apps are interoperable,
mm,
and the apps are clicking on our terms of use for our data. And as I say, the network effect would be available to anybody that built something interesting or valuable, but with permission. But billions of people could all give permission at one time to an app. So you wouldn't have to go and say, how do I do crazy things with
mm,
my app in order to get people to use it, so I can get some numbers, so I can get sticky, so I can, sell it to Google, or I can, show advertisers that I have X 100,000 or million people on my app. So it's a whole different way of thinking about the internet. We built a telecom system called RCN in 1993, when the World Wide Web was nascent, and there were
mm.
oligarchs at that time too. There were 7 baby bells, and interesting. The biggest friction point for people signing up to our little company was keeping their phone number. Because
Mm.
they would sign up. They would come to sign up because they were excited. Because, by the way, we were the first in the world to bundle, where you had phone, cable, and high-speed internet, and it's brand new, squeaky clean fiber optics in big cities in America, and high-speed internet. And it was it was great. Except people wanted to keep their
Yeah.
phone number, and we couldn't give it to them because the oligarchs of the time said they owned it, just like they say now they own our social graph, right? In 1996, the Telecom Act was passed. Phone numbers became portable. The telecom industry had a boom of private investment. Our company grew massively. Others did as well. And the carriers figured out how to be interoperable. But there was a day, you're too young to realize it, but there was a day that if you moved from San Francisco to Boston, you needed to get a new phone number. And
That's
that
fascinating.
seems
That's
silly
fa
today, right?
that's fascinating. So, yeah, just in the interest of time, I know we're a little limited, but I would just ask you, do you think that you need the buy-in of big tech companies for your vision to be realized? Because I could imagine that Google and Apple and the big tech players of the world would really throw a fight up against the protocol. How do you sort of navigate that?
I think we just go, the oligarchs in 1993 threw up a fight when we launched a telecom company. And
Yeah.
because they wanted to keep their customers and keep their monopolies. And you build it, and then you build a better product that people want, and then you get people to demand it. And in this case, the government could play a role to make phone numbers portable. Was a massive, regulation comes in 2 forms, right? One is to antitrust and controlling and trying to handcuff companies. The other is just to create a regulatory environment that allows innovation to thrive, and new companies to be built. Because if you
Mm,
have monopolies, which we have now, it's very hard to, for innovation. And I think, Manu, we need to innovate our way forward here, because I, quite frankly, don't believe that we're going to be able to regulate our way forward, because I think that these companies are just, the incumbents, the 5 big companies are just too powerful, and are, certainly have a lot of political influence, and if it's up to them, they're going to keep the status quo. As a matter of fact, you see them go to Washington now and meet with elected officials, talking about generative AI, and they want to, and absurdly, our elected officials are asking the CEOs of these big companies how should we regulate you? I mean, we
mhm.
used to have an expression, beware of the fox in the hen house. We have a fox house now. It's just one big fox house, because why would we go to the companies that are messing this up and ask them to tell us how to regulate them when they make what they messed up more powerful. Wouldn't we want to fix what's broken first and then take advantage of more powerful technology? It just seems to me so logical. We know what's broken. We see it. We all feel it. And we now know how to fix it. So let's go fix it. And then let innovators and technologists and society generally enjoy the benefits of new powerful technology built with a more sound design. Going back to that plumbing example, let's fix the plumbing so that we don't allow the poison in and make people sick. And then let's bring more people to the city and build more plumbing and grow in a healthy way where everybody's getting healthy water. So you don't just say, well, it's doing some good things as well as some bad things. And before we fix it, let's invite a lot more people in and add to the plumbing. So we'll make a lot more people sick, as well as giving some people clean water. It just doesn't make any sense to me. This technology is, I said earlier, the internet as it's currently it was invented by Tim Berners-Lee, the World Wide Web. It wasn't designed to be used the way it's being used right now, which is putting a powerful device in everyone's hand and letting everybody say whatever they want. And, bad actors have much more influence than good actors on the internet, because it's an internet that pays the liar's dividend, and it's just not designed correctly. So, but again, I hear myself repeating what's wrong with it. I want to emphasize, we can fix this. We really can. It's not, and big tech can either go along with it, and they're in the best positions to accelerating the fix, or we'll build a new model and make the old one obsolete.
So normally I end every conversation with a question that I ask every guest, which is, what motivates you? What is your why? But you touched on that a little bit. And actually, I want to change this because of what you just said there, which is that you think we can fix it. And you think that the fox is in the hen house, and now it's a fox house. And so from your perspective, the question is, how do we actually innovate our way out of this thing? And this thing being this exploitative model that you feel is using people. My generation, I think, is going to have to deal with a lot of the consequences, but also I would imagine is going to have to figure out a lot of the solutions. And so rather than ask you the traditional question I ask every guest, we're going to do something very different on the show, which is change what we've been doing for the last 37 episodes, and ask you, what is your advice to young people about how they should actually approach the internet? And importantly, how they should think about envisioning and building a world in which the internet is something, as you said, that is socially aware, that is powering humanity, that is actually investing in us so that we become a more prosperous, more democratic, more effective society. So what would your advice be to young people?
Engage. Engage and be a part of this revolution, because we're at a point where we are either going to be dragged into a future with the current tech architecture, and that is, I fear, is a future that ultimately none of us will want, and will regret going down that path. We have an alternative. We can re-architect the internet in a way that, from the ground up, by the way, not from the top down, not from the app level down, but from the protocol level up, where the internet can be the most powerful tool for positive change the world has ever seen. And by the way, for the most powerful innovation for human creativity and wealth creation for people from all over. So I think a data sharing economy is going to unlock and unleash tremendous growth and opportunity for young people everywhere. And to me, it is, when I try to boil these things down into, very, very simple terms. If you ask your contemporaries and people younger than you, Manu, Is your life going to be better than your parents or not? Polling shows that the majority of your contemporaries and younger people do not believe that their life is going to be better than their parents. And sadly, their parents don't think any differently. Why would we accept that? Why would we accept that? That's the ultimate metric for why we're here on Earth. Our job is to deliver a better planet for the next generation, and a better lifestyle, and better opportunities, and better education, and better healthcare, and so forth. So if we fix the internet and have it be put the humans at the center, not machines, prioritize human beings, not platforms, then I believe within 5 or 10 years from now, when you're asked, or some young person is asked, will your life be better than your parents? It will be an emphatic yes, because you're going to live till 150 and live a healthy life if we actually can get there. But we need to get there. If we destroy democracy and we destroy capitalism, because by the way, both are built on one simple word: trust. And if you destroy trust, you don't have a highly functioning political system or economic system. And right now, technology as designed and employed and used is destroying the very thing we need to enable the innovation and the creativity and a framework, both a political one and an economic one, so that we can thrive as a society. So I say we need to go back to the basics, remember what we're doing here, what the innovation of the American project was. It was about people getting rights that they didn't have before, human rights, and by the way, property rights. It was being able to have liberty, being able to have equality, being able to have freedom, being able to choose what they do with their lives and how they live their lives. And by the way, respecting that in other people, which is what we call the social contract. That's all being destroyed by the current usage of technology, which is because of the incentives we talked about and the fact that people now the system is structured in a way to extract our data and exploit us. That is not this is not healthy for individuals or society. So I would say get engaged, help build this new technology, and it might be help from the vantage point of actually building use cases or the technology, but it might also be making sure from a social science perspective that it's operating the way we want to support democracy. It's operating the way we want to make other kids' lives, better and less anxious and less depressed. It might be about, bringing ethical frameworks forward or policy ideas forward and so forth. There is so much room here for people to engage. And that's what Project Liberty is all about. And that's what the book, Our Biggest Fight, is about. It's a call to action to bring people in to, I don't have all the answers. Nobody does. But together, we will find the answers if we decide and agree upon what we're optimizing for.
Well, Frank, it takes a builder to know one, and I think that there's a quote that RFK once had, which is that youth is not a time of life; it's a stage of mind. And one thing that I've deeply appreciated about this conversation, I can tell from even this last 2 minutes that you just articulated, that not only are you deeply passionate, but of all the things that you could do, that you firmly believe that this is an endeavor worth pursuing. And I think that whether it's your book, Our Biggest Fight, or Project Liberty, what people I think will appreciate listening to this conversation, even if they agree or disagree in certain parts, is that the innovative spirit that you're bringing to this is, I think, necessary. And importantly, I think that most people would say that the diagnosis of the problem demands that there ought to be a solution. And so I just want to thank you for sort of the persistence and passion that you bring to the subject. And I learned a lot. And I think that a lot of young people would probably resonate and say that, hey, you know what? I think that I can see a lot of the negative effects happening. One of our mentors and somebody that works with us closely, Jonathan Haidt, another person named Tristan Harris, other folks like them, they talk a lot about, the negative effects of the internet. And I think that oftentimes there's this feeling that, man, this is some giant thing out there. There's no way we can fix it. But I think to your point, there's a sense of agency and empowerment that will allow us to actually transform it for the 21st century. And man, we haven't even talked about AI. And so maybe we'll have to have you on in the future to talk a little bit about the effects of that, because I think that that only complicates and accelerates probably the work that you're talking about. So
Well,
I,
just
I
remember,
appreciate
it's
you
all the
joining.
same. It's all the same tech. AI is generative AI is a nice marketing language for the same architecture, just a more powerful version. Large language models are predictive technology, just like algorithms, and let's fix it before we make it more powerful. And by the way, Jonathan and Tristan are, have all been part of Project Liberty. They've both helped me educate me a lot along the way, and again, it's our biggest fight. It's not my biggest fight.
Thanks, Frank, for joining the Hopeful Majority.
Yeah, you're welcome. I appreciate what you do.
Well, thank you to Frank for making the time. I'm really excited for his book to come out. I'm also excited to see where he takes a lot of these solutions. Remember, you that are listening, if you liked and enjoyed that conversation, leave a like on YouTube, subscribe on podcasts on Apple, Spotify. Every Monday, we're dropping episodes. And the most important thing, you want to know the most important thing? And no, it's not that I got a haircut. The most important thing is that you are building this hopeful majority with me. We have to elevate the voice of the majority of people who want productive dialogue, who want to be able to give people the chance to mess up, who want to give people the chance to be able to express themselves, not just so that we express our opinions, but so that we can challenge each other productively. Because most importantly, as you saw in this conversation, it's about setting up the future of our country, the future of our internet, the future of our politics for success. And the only way we do that is through productive conversations. And that one conversation at a time is the process to continued success. I'll see you next Monday.